Hiker finds an old train in the middle of a forest, but when he looks inside, the morning mist clung to Daniel Reeves' boots like ghostly fingers as he pushed deeper into the Blackwood forest. 3 hours into his hike, sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool October air. He paused to adjust his camera strap and check his GPS. The device showed nothing but green wilderness stretching endlessly in every direction. Daniel had always been drawn to forgotten places. As a former urban planner, he'd spent years designing cookie-cutter subdivisions and strip malls that erased history with bulldozers and concrete. Now, at 42, he preferred capturing nature's slow reclamation of man-made things through his lens. There was poetry in rust consuming steel, in vines strangling abandoned buildings. The marked trail had disappeared 20 minutes ago, but Daniel pressed on. His hiking boots crunched through layers of autumn leaves as he navigated between towering oak trees that seemed older than memory itself. Shafts of golden sunlight pierced the canopy, illuminating dancing dust motes and creating natural spotlights on the forest floor. A flash of red caught his eye. Daniel stopped, squinting through the undergrowth. There, barely visible beneath a tangle of blackberry vines and moss, was something that didn't belong. The geometric lines were too straight, too purposeful for nature. His pulse quickened as he pushed aside branches and stepped closer. "What the hell?" he whispered. It was metal. Rusted, weathered metal that stretched far longer than any fallen tree. Daniel's breath caught as his brain processed what he was seeing. Through the green curtain of vegetation, he could make out the unmistakable silhouette of a train car. Then another. And another. His hands trembled as he pulled out his camera, but he forced himself to stop. This deserved more than a quick snapshot. This was discovery. Daniel spent the next hour carefully documenting his approach, photographing the way nature had embraced the forgotten locomotive. Moss carpeted the engine's roof like green velvet. Saplings grew through broken windows, their branches reaching skyward as if the train were giving birth to a forest. Vines wrapped around the wheels and chassis, creating intricate patterns that looked almost deliberate. The locomotive itself was magnificent even in decay, a sleek 1950s design with Art Deco curves that spoke of an era when train travel meant elegance and adventure. The faded letters on its side were barely legible. Northern Cross Line. Daniel had never heard of it, but then again, many smaller railway companies had vanished during the post-battle years. What struck him most was the completeness of the scene. This wasn't just an abandoned engine, it was an entire passenger train, 5 cars long, resting on rails that disappeared into the forest in both directions. The tracks themselves were a marvel, completely overgrown but still perfectly aligned, as if the earth had swallowed them while they slept. As Daniel circled the train, taking shot after shot, a peculiar feeling settled over him. The forest around the locomotive was unusually quiet. No bird songs, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Even his own footsteps seemed muffled, as though the very air absorbed sound differently here. He approached the first passenger car with growing excitement. The windows were intact but clouded with decades of grime and condensation. Daniel wiped a section clean with his sleeve and peered inside. His camera nearly slipped from his hands. Instead of the empty, vandalized interior he'd expected, the passenger car looked almost preserved. Seats still held their original burgundy fabric, though faded and worn. Luggage racks above the windows still contained suitcases. A newspaper lay folded on one seat, its headlines invisible but its shape perfectly maintained. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs. In all his years of photographing abandoned places, he'd never seen anything like this. Urban explorers called it the Holy Grail, a forgotten place that time had somehow overlooked. He moved along the train's exterior, looking for a way inside. The passenger doors were locked or rusted shut, but near the third car, he found a window that had been left partially open. The gap was narrow, but Daniel managed to squeeze through after removing his camera and backpack. The moment his feet touched the floor inside, he knew this place was special. The air smelled of old leather and something else, something that reminded him of his grandmother's attic. Dust motes danced in the pale light filtering through grimy windows, but everything was exactly where it should be. Daniel moved slowly down the aisle, his footsteps echoing in the confined space. Each seat told a story. A pair of reading glasses rested on an open book. A child's coloring book lay scattered with crayons across two seats. A lady's purse sat primly in a window seat, its clasp still secured. It was as if the passengers had simply vanished mid-journey. In the fifth row, Daniel found something that made his breath catch. A small teddy bear sat in the aisle seat, its button eyes staring forward as if still waiting for its young owner to return. The bear's fur was matted and faded, but it was unmistakably loved, the kind of toy a child would never willingly leave behind. Daniel photographed everything, but his hands shook with each shot. This wasn't just an abandoned train, it was a snapshot of interrupted lives. The newspaper on the seat was dated July 3, 1961. Nearly 65 years ago, people had boarded this train with destinations in mind, conversations to finish, lives to live. Where had they gone? As Daniel explored further, he noticed personal effects scattered throughout the car with an eerie consistency. It wasn't the chaos of looting or the systematic emptiness of official removal. It was as if everyone had simply stood up and walked away, leaving their belongings as casual witnesses to their presence. A coffee cup sat in a cup holder, a lipstick stain still visible on its rim. A man's fedora rested on the seat beside it. In another row, a crossword puzzle was half completed, the pencil lying beside it as if the solver had been interrupted mid-thought. The preservation was impossible to explain. By all rights, 60 years of weather, animals, and decay should have reduced this place to empty metal and scattered debris. Instead, Daniel felt like an intruder in a museum exhibit that had been perfectly maintained by invisible curators. As he moved toward the rear of the car, something crunched under his foot. Daniel looked down to see scattered photographs, black and white family portraits that had apparently spilled from someone's purse or suitcase. He knelt and carefully gathered them up, his heart aching at the smiling faces looking back at him. There were wedding photos, vacation snapshots, images of children playing in backyards. Real people with real lives, now reduced to paper memories in an abandoned train car. Daniel felt the weight of their stories, the magnitude of their absence. But it was the last photograph in the pile that stopped him cold. A family of 4 stood in front of a modest suburban home, their faces bright with hope and excitement. The father wore a suit and held a suitcase. The mother clutched a baby to her chest. And between them stood a little girl, maybe 7 years old, with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. Something about her face was hauntingly familiar, though Daniel was certain he'd never seen the photograph before. The girl's eyes seemed to look directly at him across the decades, as if she were trying to tell him something important. Daniel slipped the photographs into his jacket pocket and continued exploring. Whatever had happened here, these people deserved to be remembered. Their story deserved to be told. But first, he needed to understand what that story was. As golden afternoon light slanted through the train windows, painting everything in amber hues, Daniel realized he'd stumbled onto something far more significant than an abandoned locomotive. This was a mystery that had been waiting 65 years for someone to find it. And he was just getting started. The leather seat creaked as Daniel knelt beside it, his fingers tracing the worn fabric. Something was different about this particular row. The 4th seat from the window had been deliberately moved, creating a small gap that revealed a dark space beneath. His flashlight beam caught the corner of something metallic wedged between the floor and the seat frame. Daniel's pulse quickened. After 2 hours of exploring the passenger car, he'd grown accustomed to finding personal belongings scattered about, but this felt intentional. Hidden. He worked carefully, using his multi-tool to pry the seat further back. The metal object shifted, revealing itself to be the corner of a small trunk, the kind families used for precious documents during long journeys. It was stuck tight, as if someone had shoved it there in desperate haste. After several minutes of careful maneuvering, Daniel managed to extract the trunk. It was surprisingly heavy, made of sturdy steel with brass corners that had turned green with age. A small padlock secured the latch, but 60 years of moisture had weakened the metal. The lock broke with a sharp crack when Daniel applied pressure with his tool. The trunk's hinges protested with a rusty squeal as he lifted the lid. Inside, protected by oilcloth wrapping, lay a treasure trove of memories that made his heart race. Photographs. Dozens of them, organized in neat stacks with rubber bands that crumbled at his touch. The top photo was the same family from the scattered pictures he'd found, only this time, he could see the back. In careful cursive handwriting, someone had written, "The Hargreaves Summer 1961 ready for our new adventure in California." Daniel's hands trembled as he lifted out the photographs one by one. Here was the family's entire life story laid out in black and white. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, the little girl's first day of school. The father, tall and proud in his railroad uniform. He worked for the Northern Cross Line, Daniel realized. The mother, elegant in her Sunday dresses, always smiling. The baby who grew into a toddler over the course of the photos. And the little girl, Lily, according to a photo caption, who aged from perhaps 5 to 7 across the collection. But it was Lily's face that kept drawing Daniel's attention. Those eyes, that smile, they reminded him so painfully of someone he'd spent years trying not to think about. His sister Emma, who died at age 8 in a car accident 25 years ago. The resemblance was uncanny, right down to the way Lily tilted her head when she laughed. Beneath the photographs lay a stack of letters, their envelopes yellow with age. Daniel opened the first one carefully. It was addressed to Mrs. Margaret Hargrave, from someone named Ruth in California. "Maggie, I can't wait for you to see the house. Tommy and I have prepared the extra room for Lily, and little Bobby will love the big backyard. The schools here are wonderful, and Jim should have no trouble finding work with the Southern Pacific. California is the land of dreams, sister. Pack light and come quickly, your new life awaits." Daniel read letter after letter, watching the Hargrave family's excitement build. Jim Hargrave had been offered a conductor position with better pay. They'd sold their house in Ohio. Maggie had already enrolled Lily in a California elementary school. Everything was planned, everything was ready. The letters painted a picture of hope, of a family chasing the American dream westward like so many others in 1961. But the tone shifted in the final few letters. Ruth's handwriting became more urgent, more worried. "Maggie, I haven't heard from you in 2 weeks. Your last letter said you were leaving on July 1st on the Northern Cross Special Service. You should have been here by July 4th for the holiday. Please wire me as soon as you get this. I'm worried sick." The last letter was different. It wasn't from Ruth, it was from Margaret Hargrave herself, written in a shaky hand that suggested haste or fear. "Ruth, something's wrong with the train. We stopped in the middle of nowhere hours ago. The conductor says there's a problem with the tracks ahead, but Jim thinks." The letter ended mid-sentence, the pen trailing off the page as if Margaret had been interrupted. The date stamp read July 3, 1961. Daniel's mouth went dry. He'd found the exact moment the Hargrave family had vanished from history. At the bottom of the trunk lay one final item, an 8mm film reel in a metal canister. The label, written in a child's careful printing, read, "Lily's Movie Art Trip to California, July 1961. Daniel held the small canister up to his flashlight beam, his hands shaking. Inside was the last record of the Hargrave family's existence, their final moments of happiness before whatever happened on July 3rd changed everything. He carefully packed everything back into the trunk, his mind racing. This wasn't just a discovery anymore, it was evidence. Evidence of lives interrupted, of a story that had been buried for over 6 decades. As Daniel prepared to leave the train car, he took one last look at Lily's photograph. In the fading daylight filtering through the grimy windows, her smile seemed sadder somehow, as if she knew what was coming. "I'll find out what happened to you," Daniel whispered to the empty car. "I promise." The forest seemed to hold its breath as he climbed back through the window, the trunk clutched against his chest. Behind him, the abandoned train settled deeper into the gathering shadows, keeping its secrets for another night. But not for much longer. Daniel couldn't sleep. 3 days had passed since his discovery, and the Hargrave family haunted every waking moment. He pitched his tent 50 yards from the train, unable to leave the site despite the October nights growing colder. Each morning, he'd brew coffee on his camp stove and stare at the locomotive emerging from the mist like a ghost ship. The trunk sat beside his sleeping bag, its contents spread across a waterproof tarp like pieces of an impossible puzzle. He'd memorized every photograph, read every letter a dozen times. But the more he learned about the Hargraves, the more questions multiplied in his mind. On the fourth morning, Daniel packed his gear with reluctant determination. He needed answers that only civilization could provide. The nearest town, Cedar Falls, was a 40-minute drive from the Forest Access Road. Its main street looked frozen in the 1980s, with a single diner, a hardware store, and most importantly, a small public library housed in a converted Victorian mansion. The librarian, Mrs. Hendricks, was a woman in her 70s with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She looked skeptical when Daniel explained he was researching a family that had disappeared in 1961. "Genealogy research?" she asked, leading him to a back room filled with filing cabinets and microfiche machines. "Something like that," Daniel replied, not wanting to sound crazy by mentioning the train. Mrs. Hendricks showed him how to operate the ancient microfiche reader, then left him alone with boxes of archived newspapers and records. Daniel started with the Cedar Falls Gazette, scrolling through July 1961 edition by edition. Nothing. No mention of missing trains, no reports of the Hargrave family, no Northern Cross Line accidents. He expanded his search to surrounding towns, then to state records. Hours passed in a blur of crackling microfilm and strained eyes. Daniel's back ached from hunching over the machine, but he pressed on, driven by Lily's smile in those photographs. Finally, in the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department records, he found a single entry dated July 8, 1961. Inquiry received regarding whereabouts of Hargrave family. Reported missing by Sister Ruth Morrison of Sacramento, California. No local record of family residence. Matter referred to state authorities. That was it. One line, then nothing. No follow-up reports, no investigation records, no resolution. Daniel sat back in his chair stunned. A family of 4 had vanished completely, and the authorities had barely noticed. He switched to phone books and city directories, searching for any trace of the Northern Cross Line. The railroad company appeared in directories through 1960, then disappeared entirely. No bankruptcy notices, no acquisition announcements, no explanations. "Find what you were looking for?" Mrs. Hendricks asked, appearing beside his table with a cup of coffee. "Actually, I'm not finding what I'm looking for," Daniel said. "That's the problem." She sat down across from him, curiosity overriding her earlier skepticism. "Sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones that aren't written down. What family are you researching?" "The Hargraves. Jim, Margaret, Lily, and baby Bobby. They were supposed to travel from Ohio to California in July 1961. Mrs. Hendricks' face went pale. "Hargrave? Are you sure?" Daniel's pulse quickened. "You know the name?" "Not directly, but..." She hesitated, then leaned forward. "My late husband worked for the State Highway Department back in the 60s. He used to tell strange stories about surveyors finding things in the deep woods that weren't supposed to be there. Railroad equipment, passenger cars. The state would send cleanup crews, but the reports would disappear." "What kind of things?" "Off-the-books operations. Railways that hauled more than passengers, if you catch my meaning. The 50s and 60s were complicated times, Mr. Reeves. Not everything was legal, and not everything that went wrong got reported." Daniel felt ice forming in his stomach. "Are you saying the Northern Cross Line was involved in something illegal?" "I'm not saying anything," Mrs. Hendricks replied carefully. "But if you're researching a family that disappeared on a train that officially never existed, you might want to consider why someone would want that story buried." That evening, Daniel sat in his tent staring at the film reel. He'd purchased a small 8mm projector from an antique shop in Cedar Falls, but he hadn't worked up the courage to watch Lily's movie yet. Something about seeing those final happy moments felt too intimate, too painful. His laptop showed dozens of open browser tabs, genealogy websites, railroad historical societies, missing persons databases. Every search for Hargrave family 1961 returned nothing. It was as if they'd been systematically erased from every record. But people couldn't just disappear without leaving traces. Someone had to remember them. Someone had to know what really happened on July 3, 1961. Daniel thought about Mrs. Hendricks' words. Railways that hauled more than passengers. Cleanup crews. Disappeared reports. What if the Northern Cross line hadn't been a legitimate passenger service at all? What if the Hargraves had unknowingly boarded something much more dangerous? As darkness settled over the forest, Daniel finally loaded the film reel into the projector. The beam of light cut through his tent, creating a makeshift screen on the canvas wall. His finger hovered over the play button. Whatever was on this film might be the last evidence that the Hargrave family had ever existed. Once he watched it, there would be no going back. He would know their faces, hear their voices, see their dreams. And then he would have to find out who had stolen those dreams away. Daniel pressed play. The 8mm film flickered to life on the canvas wall of Daniel's tent. Grainy color images danced in the lamplight as a child's excited voice narrated the scene. "This is me and Daddy at the train station." Lily's voice, bright and innocent, cut through 60 years of silence. "We're going to California to live near Aunt Ruth." Daniel watched, transfixed, as the Hargrave family appeared in living color. Jim Hargrave looked proud in his conductor's uniform, lifting Lily onto his shoulders. Margaret held baby Bobby, pointing excitedly at the camera. They were so alive, so full of hope. The film lasted only 8 minutes. The final frame showed Lily waving goodbye to someone off camera, her gap-toothed smile radiant with anticipation. Then the screen went white, and Daniel was alone again with the sound of his own ragged breathing. He sat in the darkness for a long time, feeling the weight of what he'd witnessed. These weren't just names and dusty records anymore. They were real people with real dreams, now reduced to flickering memories on degraded film stock. Morning came gray and drizzling. Daniel packed the projector away and returned to the train, but this time with a different purpose. He'd explored the first 4 passenger cars thoroughly, but the final carriage had seemed too damaged to enter safely. A massive oak tree had fallen across it decades ago, crushing the roof and twisting the metal frame. But if someone had wanted to hide evidence, the destroyed car would be the perfect place. Daniel circled the wreckage, looking for a way inside. The windows were either blocked by debris or too high to reach safely. Finally, he found a section where the twisted metal had created a gap just wide enough for him to squeeze through. The interior was a chaos of broken seats, scattered glass, and rotting wood from the fallen tree. Water had pooled in several places, creating a swamp-like environment that reeked of decay. Daniel's flashlight beam cut through the murky air, revealing the extent of the damage. Most of the car was uninhabitable, but toward the rear, he found a section that had been partially protected by an overturned luggage rack. As he cleared away debris, his light caught something that made him freeze. The floorboards in this section were different. While the rest of the car had standard wooden planking, this area featured a trapdoor-style access panel. And someone had pried it open. Daniel knelt beside the opening, shining his light into the space below. Instead of train mechanisms or storage, he found a hidden compartment that had been deliberately constructed. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and remarkably preserved, were items that definitely didn't belong to any passenger. The first thing he pulled out was a camera, not an amateur's snapshot device like Lily had used, but a professional model with multiple lenses and a leather case marked "Official use only." The film inside was still undeveloped. Next came a conductor's uniform, but it was torn and stained with something dark that might have been blood. The name tag read, J. Morrison, not Hargrave. But it was the third item that made Daniel's hands tremble, a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with increasingly frantic handwriting. Daniel opened to the first entry, dated June 15, 1961. Beginning special assignment. Passengers unaware of true destination. Company orders are to maintain normal service appearance until we reach the designated coordinates. His blood turned to ice as he read on. June 28th. Growing concerns about the cargo manifest. Company says it's agricultural equipment, but the weight distribution is all wrong. Morrison suspects were hauling something else entirely. July 1st. Passengers boarded as scheduled. The Hargrave family seems especially excited about their new life in California. If they only knew. God help me, what have I gotten myself into? July 2nd. Morrison confronted me about the route changes. He knows we're not heading to any regular station. I told him it's company orders, but he's threatening to stop the train. The cargo handlers are getting nervous. The entries became increasingly desperate. July 3rd. Something's gone terribly wrong. Morrison tried to contact the authorities at the last station, but the radio equipment was sabotaged. We're off the main line now, heading into wilderness areas that aren't on any passenger map. The cargo is definitely not agricultural equipment. I can hear it moving. July 3rd later. They were never supposed to stop here. That's what the company man told Morrison before they. Christ, there's so much blood. The passengers are asking questions. The little girl, Lily, keeps asking when we'll reach California. I don't have the heart to tell her we never will. The final entry was barely legible, written in a shaking hand. Morrison is finished. The cargo handlers are finished. Whatever was in those crates is loose now. I can hear it in the woods outside. The passengers are barricaded in car 3, but it won't hold for long. If anyone finds this journal, know that the Northern Cross line was a front for something unspeakable. Everyone knows. They planned this. God forgive us all. Daniel dropped the journal, his hands shaking uncontrollably. The train hadn't been carrying passengers to California. It had been carrying them to their deaths. And whatever had finished them was still out there in the forest. A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness outside the wreckage. Daniel grabbed the camera, the torn uniform, and the journal, stuffing them into his backpack with desperate haste. As he squeezed back through the gap in the twisted metal, he could have sworn he heard something moving in the deeper woods. Something that had been waiting 60 years for someone else to find the truth. He ran. Daniel didn't stop running until his lungs burned and his legs gave out. He collapsed against a massive pine tree, gasping for air, the conductor's journal clutched against his chest. Behind him, the forest seemed to whisper with unseen movement, but nothing emerged from the shadows. After catching his breath, Daniel forced himself to think rationally. Whatever had happened in 1961 was long over. The sounds he'd heard were probably just his imagination, triggered by the horrifying revelations in the journal. But as he stood up, brushing pine needles from his jacket, he noticed something that made his skin crawl. He wasn't where he thought he was. In his panic, Daniel had run deeper into the forest instead of back toward his campsite. The trees here were different, older, more twisted, with bark that looked almost diseased. Moss hung from branches like tattered curtains, and the undergrowth was sparse, as if nothing wanted to grow in this soil. Daniel checked his GPS, but the device showed only static. He tried his compass, watching the needle spin wildly before settling on a direction that felt completely wrong. The forest seemed to be playing tricks on him, just as it had played tricks on the Northern Cross line 60 years ago. But as he tried to get his bearings, Daniel noticed something else, a faint path worn into the forest floor. It was barely visible, little more than a depression in the earth, but it was definitely man-made. Someone had walked this route many times, wearing down the vegetation and creating a subtle trail through the wilderness. Daniel followed the path, his camera ready and his senses alert. After 20 minutes of careful walking, he smelled smoke. Not fresh smoke, but the lingering scent of old fires, wood ash mixed with something else he couldn't identify. The path led to a small clearing that made Daniel's heart race. Here, hidden in a natural depression surrounded by towering trees, were the remnants of a camp. But this wasn't a modern camping site, it was the kind of desperate shelter that survivors might build. Makeshift lean-tos constructed from train car debris leaned against tree trunks. Pieces of burgundy fabric from the passenger seats had been stretched between branches to create windbreaks. A fire pit sat in the center of the clearing, its stones blackened from years of use. But it was the artifacts scattered around the campsite that told the real story. Daniel found a child's shoe, small and worn, half buried under fallen leaves. A woman's compact mirror, its glass cracked but still reflecting light. A man's pocket watch, stopped at 3:47, its chain broken as if torn away in haste. These were Hargrave family belongings, which meant they had survived the initial attack. At least some of them had made it out of that train alive. Daniel photographed everything, his excitement growing with each discovery. The camp showed signs of long-term habitation. Someone had lived here for weeks, maybe months. Crude tools had been fashioned from train wreckage. A makeshift rain collection system channeled water into improvised containers. But the most disturbing discovery came when Daniel explored the edges of the clearing. Nailed to a large oak tree, exactly at a child's eye level, was a piece of paper that made his blood freeze. It was Lily's drawing from the trunk, the same crayon artwork he'd found in the passenger car. But now it was changed. Someone had added to the picture with charcoal and ash. Dark shapes lurked at the edges of the original drawing. Stick figures lay on the ground with X's for eyes. And written across the bottom in a child's shaky handwriting were words that broke Daniel's heart. "Mommy and Daddy are sleeping. The bad thing took Bobby. I'm all alone." Daniel stared at the drawing, his hands trembling. Lily had survived. She'd lived in this camp, probably for months, slowly adding to her drawing as her family died around her. A 7-year-old girl, alone in the wilderness, trying to make sense of unimaginable horror. But how long had she survived? And what had eventually happened to her? Daniel continued searching the camp, looking for more clues. Near one of the lean-tos, he found a collection of objects that suggested ritual or desperate hope: coins arranged in careful patterns, small stones stacked into cairns, pieces of jewelry hung from branches like offerings to unseen gods. The fire pit contained the remains of more than just wood. Daniel recognized fragments of passenger belongings, deliberately burned. But mixed in with the ash were other things: bones that looked too small to be animal, scraps of fabric that might once have been a child's dress. As the afternoon light began to fade, Daniel made one final discovery that changed everything. Hidden beneath a pile of stones at the far edge of the clearing was a small grave marker. It was crude, made from a piece of train wreckage, but someone had carefully carved words into the metal. "Lily Hargrave, age 7, she tried to go home." Beneath the marker, the earth showed signs of recent disturbance. Not from decades ago, but recent. Someone had been maintaining this grave, leaving fresh flowers that had only recently withered. Daniel's mind reeled with the implications. If Lily had died here as a child, who was taking care of her grave? Who knew about this place? A twig snapped behind him. Daniel spun around, his heart hammering, to see a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was an old man, probably in his 80s, wearing clothes that looked like they'd been patched and repatched countless times. His eyes were sharp and intelligent, but there was something wild about him, something that spoke of decades spent far from civilization. "You found her," the old man said, his voice like rustling leaves. "I wondered when someone would finally come looking." Daniel's hand instinctively moved to his camera, but he didn't raise it. "Who are you?" The old man stepped closer, and Daniel could see scars covering his arms and face, old scars, like claw marks. "Name's Morrison," he said. "Jimmy Morrison. I was the conductor on that train. And I've been taking care of Lily's grave for 60 years, waiting for someone to find the truth." Daniel's world tilted. According to the journal, Morrison was supposed to be deceased. But the journal said... "The journal said a lot of things," Morrison interrupted. "Some true, some not. But it didn't tell the whole story." His eyes fixed on Daniel with an intensity that was almost frightening. "The question is, boy, are you ready to hear what really happened that night? Because once you know, you can never unknow it." 3 weeks later, Daniel sat in the Cedar Falls Public Library, his laptop open to a document titled, "The Hargrave Family Investigation Final Report." Beside him sat a manila envelope containing photographs, copies of letters, and a detailed account of everything he'd discovered in the Blackwood Forest. But the report would never be submitted to any authorities. Morrison's story had changed everything. The old conductor, who'd spent 60 years as a hermit in the woods, had finally told someone the truth about July 3, 1961. The Northern Cross line had indeed been a front, but not for transporting mysterious cargo. It was a relocation service, a way to quietly move families who'd witnessed classified military experiments. The Hargraves hadn't been passengers. They'd been witnesses scheduled for permanent relocation to a facility that would ensure their silence forever. Morrison had discovered the truth too late. When he tried to radio for help, the other crew members, agents posing as railroad workers, had turned on him. The attack, described in the journal, hadn't come from some monster in a crate. It had come from the very people the passengers trusted to keep them safe. They finished Jim first. Morrison had told Daniel, his voice hollow with decades of guilt. Shot him right in front of his family when he tried to fight back. Then Margaret, when she wouldn't stop screaming. Baby Bobby, he just wouldn't stop crying. Morrison had hidden in the baggage car during the massacre, emerging only after the criminals had left. He'd found 7-year-old Lily crouched under a seat, traumatized into silence, the sole survivor of her family. I should have taken her to town, Morrison had whispered, tears streaming down his weathered face. Should have turned myself in, told the authorities what really happened. But I was a coward. I was terrified they'd come back to finish the job. Instead, Morrison had built the camp, trying to keep Lily alive in the wilderness while he figured out what to do. For 3 months, they'd survived together, the guilt-ridden conductor and the broken little girl who rarely spoke and never smiled. But trauma and exposure had taken their toll. Lily had died of pneumonia just before winter set in, calling for her mother with her last breath. Morrison had buried her in the clearing and stayed to tend her grave, too broken by guilt and grief to ever leave. Now, Daniel faced an impossible choice. Morrison had given him evidence that could expose a decades-old conspiracy, could bring justice for the Hargrave family. But it would also destroy an old man who'd spent his life paying for his moment of cowardice, and it would open wounds that some people might prefer to keep buried. Daniel closed his laptop and picked up the manila envelope. Instead of walking to the sheriff's office, he drove to the Cedar Falls Historical Society, a small building next to the library that Mrs. Hendricks had mentioned. The society's director, a retired teacher named Eleanor Cross, listened to Daniel's carefully edited story with growing fascination. He told her about finding abandoned train cars, but not the massacre, about discovering the Hargrave family photos and letters, but not the conspiracy, about their planned move to California, but not their true fate. What a remarkable find, Eleanor said, examining the photographs. These will make a wonderful addition to our collection of local railroad history. The Hargraves deserve to be remembered. Daniel nodded, knowing that this was the best he could do. The truth was too dangerous for the living, but the memory of the family could survive in a safer form. That evening, Daniel returned to the forest one last time. Morrison was waiting at Lily's grave, a small bouquet of wildflowers in his gnarled hands. Made your choice? The old man asked. I gave their photos and letters to the Historical Society, Daniel said. They'll be remembered, but not the whole truth. Not what it would cost you. Morrison nodded slowly. Probably for the best. Some stories are too heavy for the world to carry. They stood in silence for a moment, two men bound by a secret that would die with them. I'll visit sometimes, Daniel promised. Make sure she's not forgotten. I'd appreciate that, Morrison replied. Gets lonely out here talking to ghosts. As Daniel walked back through the forest for the last time, he thought about the weight of untold stories, the price of keeping secrets, and the different ways people find redemption. Morrison had spent 60 years punishing himself for a moment of cowardice, but in the end, his guilt had preserved the memory of a little girl who might otherwise have been forgotten entirely. The next morning, Daniel packed his car and drove away from Cedar Falls. In his rearview mirror, the Blackwood Forest stretched endlessly, keeping its secrets safe in shadows and silence. But somewhere in the Cedar Falls Historical Society, Lily Hargraves smiled from a photograph, surrounded by her family, captured forever in a moment when they still believed in happy endings. And sometimes, Daniel knew, that was the only justice possible, not the whole truth, but the preservation of love in the face of unimaginable loss. She was remembered. She was not forgotten. And perhaps that was enough.